Let's be honest about passwords. Either you, a family member, or someone you know is using the same password for Netflix, Instagram, their bank account, and a couple of dozen other things, right? Look, that's called credential stuffing, and it's a big no-no. It's the number one way that account hacking takes place. One login gets leaked onto the dark web, and suddenly everything is compromised. Yes, there are a lot of bad actors out there on the internet, and fortunately, today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, which is helping to give internet users all the tricks and tools of a proper 21st century online experience. Look, you may have heard me talk about what NordVPN can do for you previously. Encrypt your internet data, remove your online activity to another location with just one click, either for superior security or new streaming options, and all of that's still true. They've got thousands of servers in dozens of countries, but VPNs give you access to so many more options than just new TV shows. With NordVPN, you really can do it all, and that includes utilizing their threat protection upgrade, which blocks ads, eradicates web trackers, checks for malware, and more. Right now, as part of a unique deal, you guys can get a 2-year plan at a huge discount, plus an additional 4 months for free. And if you try Nord and change your mind, they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. All you got to do is head to nordvpn.com/TIFO. Again, that's nordvpn.com/TIFO for a 2-year deal at a huge discount, plus 4 additional months for free. Or you can just click the link in the description box below. And now today's video. For much of its recent history, the North American continent has benefited greatly from its geographic isolation, being separated from hostile nations by thousands of kilometers of ocean. The protective moat proved especially useful during the Second World War, allowing American-Canadian factories to churn out vast quantities of material almost entirely unmolested by enemy forces. The few attacks the Axis did manage to launch against the continent were insignificant and had almost no effect on the conflict. On the West Coast, Japanese operations consisted of a few dozen shells fired by submarines against shore targets in California and British Columbia, and the launch of 9,300 Fugo incendiary balloons across the Pacific. However, few of those balloons reached the continent, and those that did caused negligible damage and only 6 deaths, as we previously covered when we visited the site of that attack a few years back. The East Coast, meanwhile, was even quieter. Though early in the war, German U-boats sank a significant number of Allied ships off the American coast, the only Germans to actually land in the country were the 8 spies and saboteurs of Operation Pistorius in June of 1942. However, the operation was almost immediately betrayed by its ringleader before it could do any damage. The only other German landing on the continent took place in northern Labrador in October of 1943 and was so secret that it remained forgotten for nearly 4 decades. This is the strange tale of Weather Station Kurt, the only armed Nazi operation ever carried out on North American soil. In the Second World War, as throughout all of history, weather was king of the battlefield. Military forces needed accurate weather forecasts in order to successfully plan all manner of operations, from aerial bombing raids to naval maneuvers. In this field, the Germans were at a significant disadvantage, for at northern latitudes, weather patterns typically move west to east, meaning the Allies could obtain forecasts hours ahead of their enemy. Before the war, the Germans attempted to solve this problem by building a network of manned weather stations across the North Atlantic, including in Greenland and Iceland. However, at the outbreak of hostilities, these installations were quickly discovered and captured by the Allies. The Germans thus turned to weather ships, U-boats, and aircraft to collect meteorological data, but these proved of limited utility. German aircraft had limited range, and broadcasting regular weather reports made ships and U-boats highly vulnerable to detection and attack. Indeed, it was this very vulnerability that allowed the Allies to make one of the greatest intelligence coups of the war. While weather ships transmitted their reports uncoded, they were nonetheless equipped with Enigma cipher machines and codebooks to translate messages transmitted from German naval headquarters. In 1941, British codebreaker Harry Hinsley realized that if one of these unarmed and unprotected vessels could be captured quickly enough, its codebooks could be recovered before the crew had time to destroy them. The Royal Navy duly dispatched a flotilla of 7 destroyers and cruisers to the coast of Iceland, where in May 1941 they captured the German weather ship Moon. The codebooks captured from the ship allowed the Allies to decode nearly all German weather traffic during the month of June. A month later, another flotilla was dispatched and captured the weather ship Lauenburg, along with its codebooks for the month of July. These operations yielded valuable information about German encipherment procedures, allowing the Allies to continue cracking Enigma messages without the need for further captures. With their manned meteorological network fully compromised, the Germans came up with an ingenious solution: the Wetterfungerät Land, or Weather Radio Device Land. Designed by Dr. Ernst Plotzer and Edwin Stobe and manufactured by the Siemens Company, the WFL was an automatic weather station designed to be secretly deployed in remote areas throughout the North Atlantic. The device comprised 10 cylindrical metal canisters, each 47 centimeters in diameter and 1.5 meters long. One canister had meteorological instruments, including a thermometer, barometer, anemometer, and wind vane mounted on a short mast, while another held a Lorenz 150 radio transmitter and a 10-meter antenna mast. The other 8 canisters held nickel-cadmium batteries capable of powering the station for up to 6 months. The WFL was designed to transmit weather readings in Morse code every 3 hours at a frequency of 3,940 kHz, each transmission lasting around 2 minutes. The modular design of the station was to allow for easier transport aboard a U-boat. In total, 21 WFLs were manufactured by Siemens, 14 were deployed around the Arctic, including in Greenland, Spitsbergen, and Franz Josef Land, while 5 were hidden around the Barents Sea near Russia. The last 2 were intended for the east coast of North America, as far west as the Germans could reach. And so it was that on September the 18th, 1943, the Type 9 U-boat U-537, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Peter Schroe, left its base in Lorient, France, and sailed out into the Atlantic. Aboard were Siemens technicians Dr. Kurt Sommermeier and Walter Hildebrand, and weather station WFL-26, nicknamed Kurt after Sommermeier, the senior of the 2 technicians. The month-long journey across the Atlantic to North America was a harrowing one, with the U-boat encountering a violent storm during which it collided with an iceberg. The collision ripped off the submarine's anti-aircraft gun and damaged the hull, leaving it unable to dive or defend itself against Allied aircraft. Nonetheless, U-537 made the crossing undetected, and on October the 22nd arrived at Marin Bay, Labrador, just 6 degrees south of the Arctic Circle, in what was then the independent Dominion of Newfoundland. The remote, windswept site was chosen to minimize the risk of the weather station being discovered by Allied ships or local Inuit people. Captain Schroe dropped anchor off the shore and sent ashore a small scouting party, who soon found an ideal site about half a kilometer inland. The components of the weather station, along with Sommermeier, Hildebrand, and 10 sailors, were then ferried ashore in rubber rafts. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew worked to repair the storm damage to the submarine. While armed lookouts guarded the site, the sailors and technicians assembled and tested the weather station. The camouflage of the station was painted with white splotches to blend in with the snow-flecked landscape, while American cigarette cartons were strewn about the site to give the impression that it was an Allied military installation. In a final, rather misguided attempt at deception, one of the canisters was also stenciled with the words Canadian Meteor Service, despite the fact that A, no such organization existed, and B, at the time Labrador was not even a part of Canada, not becoming a province until 1949. The assembly process was slow and tedious, the short daylight hours forcing the crew to work in near darkness and bitter cold. Less than 28 hours later, however, the team finished and returned to the newly repaired submarine. At 5:40 p.m. on October the 23rd, U-537 weighed anchor and sailed south for the Labrador Sea. There, the radio operator picked up the first scheduled transmission from weather station Kirk, confirming that the installation was working as designed. However, it was not to last. Within only a few days, the station's transmissions began to degrade. Within 3 weeks, it had ceased to transmit altogether. It had been speculated that faulty batteries or Allied radio jamming was responsible for Kurt's failure, although there is no evidence the Allies ever became aware of the station's existence. Meanwhile, U-537 embarked on regular anti-shipping patrol off the shore of Newfoundland. Though she sank no ships, she survived 3 attacks by Allied aircraft, returning safely to Lorient December the 8th. Their technicians, Kurt Sommermeier and Walter Hildebrand, along with 1 crewman, disembarked before the U-boat was refitted and sent out for its next patrol, this time to the Far East. 11 months later, on November the 11th, 1944, U-537 was torpedoed by the American submarine USS Flounder and sunk with all hands near the Dutch East Indies. With all but 3 men involved in the installation now dead, weather station Kurt was promptly forgotten about and lay abandoned in its remote northern bay, silent and rusting for nearly 4 decades. It wasn't until 1977 that Canadian geomorphologist Peter Johnson stumbled upon the remains of the long-forgotten Nazi operation. Johnson was part of the Torn Ghat Archaeological Project, an initiative by the Smithsonian Institution and Bryn Mawr College to survey archaeological sites and collect geological and botanical data along the Labrador coast. Johnson, unaware of what he had discovered, assumed the station was a Canadian military installation and gave the site the designation Martin Bay 7 before moving out. Meanwhile, in Germany, a retired Siemens engineer named Franz Sellinger was writing a history of the company. In the course of his research, Sellinger stumbled upon Dr. Kurt Sommermeier's papers, which contained photographs of an automatic weather station being deployed by U-boat somewhere in the Arctic. The photographs did not match any installations Sellinger had previously identified, suggesting that this was a previously unknown mission. Sellinger was eventually able to narrow down the location to the coast of Labrador, but neither the American nor Canadian military authorities had any knowledge of the station. It was only with the help of Dr. Sommermeier's son that Sellinger was able to identify the U-boat as U-537 and track down the submarine's logbook in an archive in Freiburg. With the station's exact location in hand, Selinger then contacted historian W.A.B. Douglas of the Canadian Department of Defense, who visited Martin Bay in 1981. He found the station still largely intact, though several canisters had been opened and their contents scattered by scrap metal hunters. The remains of where the station occurred were recovered and restored and are now on display at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. The unassuming collection of grey canisters and masts stands as a reminder of the surprisingly vital role played by meteorology during the Second World War, and of the only time armed Nazis ever landed on North American soil.